everybody, welcome to Every Arnold Movie Ever, Episode 1. You know, when I was considering which video series to start up, I got a ton of feedback from a lot of you, and I want to tackle a lot of those ideas: an Alien series, a David Lynch series, Aquaman, Billy Blaze, but I got to thinking about what made me fall in love with movies. And I immediately thought of a couple things: Night of the Living Dead, Star Wars, and Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. Arnold has been a constant presence all my movie-going life, and seeing his movies as a kid blew my mind. At first, it was just the spectacle of Arnold the action star, like Conan the Barbarian. But he seemed to choose these smart, innovative action movies that pushed the limits of technology and really stood on firm storytelling footing. He's got the best decade-long run in action movie history. Every movie was an event, from 84 to 94. And as you can tell, I am a massive, massive Arnold Schwarzenegger fan. As a kid, I wrote my own Predator and Terminator film scripts. Terminator 2 is my favorite movie of all time. I've seen all but 2 of his movies, and bonus, dream come true, I actually worked with him during his WWE Hall of Fame induction. Here's the proof of us posing like we're in a buddy cop comedy. To me, he is the ultimate action movie star, and he's the embodiment of the American dream, an immigrant who became a household name through sheer will and hard work. He's the most famous bodybuilder ever to live, one of the biggest movie stars of all time, and also a California governor. He's also made some serious mistakes along the way. No, much more serious mistakes. Yes, bad. He is flawed, but fascinating, and his movie career is unparalleled. He's got a rise, he's got a long time at the top, and then there's a very distinct demarcation line where things start to slide. Then he goes to be governor, and then post-governorship, he's got a whole other career. I'm excited to talk about all that, and as I do, I'll provide context and research from his own 2012 autobiography, Total Recall: My Unbelievably True Life Story. This will be exhaustive. It will cover every major movie, and it will take months, but it's going to be a lot of fun, I think. And so, before we get to the fun, we must dutifully start at the beginning with 1970s Hercules in New York. Or, as Arnold would say, and say often,
I'm Hercules. My name is Hercules. I'm Hercules. I'm Hercules. 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 You have struck Hercules.
Hercules. By 1969, Arnold was already a multiple-time Mr. Universe and second-place Mr. Olympia. He hadn't won yet, but he was going to, obviously. It was only a matter of time before he got into movies. That was another dream of his. And so the story goes, Mr. America, Dennis Tinerino, was originally offered the role of Hercules, but Arnold's friend Joe Waiter had a grudge against Dennis, so he called up the producers and he told them, I've got a guy who has been a Shakespearean actor in Vienna, and you should hire this guy immediately. And according to Arnold, there is no such thing as an Austrian Shakespearean actor. In fact, Arnold could barely speak English. He couldn't even understand the sentences in the script, and the 2 weeks of acting and dialogue coaches obviously weren't enough to make up for it. But when you watch the movie, honestly, you can barely notice.
Zeus has only to speak now for Hercules to obey.
Because that's not his voice. Yes, they dubbed his voice because he could not say the dialogue clearly. It wasn't until years later when he became a star that they finally released a version with his original dialogue.
Zeus has only to speak now for Hercules to obey.
And let's get this out of the way right now. This is not a movie. It is a curiosity, a carnival sideshow. Step right up, everyone. Come take a look at the first on-screen appearance of the Austrian Oak. Watch him wrestle man, bear, and the English language. This is for completists and Arnold scholars only. Here's what Arnold had to say about it himself. I found the experience daunting, I have to admit. I thought it would take me at least until I was 30 to be in a movie. But here I was at 22 in America, starring as Hercules. I'm not ready. I haven't even learned how to act. So with that preamble, let's get into Hercules in New York. First thing you're going to notice, he is billed as Arnold Strong for obvious reasons. His name is too ludicrous, unpronounceable, etc., etc. They also thought it would be funny if the movie starred Arnold Strong and Arnold Stang, just so you understand their comedy chops heading in. And I guess this is technically a comedy. According to the posters, it's tremendous! It's stupendous! It's fun! Let's find out how much fun we're having here. It opens on Mount Olympus, aka Central Park in New York City. In fact, 75% of the movie takes place in Central Park. Hercules is bored and wants to go on an adventure. And Zeus doesn't like that, so he throws a piece of rebar at him and sends him to Earth. And this exchange between Zeus and Arnold gives you the perfect idea of where Arnold's baseline acting begins.
It may not be entirely without merit, but you wouldn't like it down there.
Let me be the judge of that. I am tired of the same old faces, the same old things.
He has this vacant look. He doesn't know how to occupy space. He's just incredibly awkward. Looks great, though. But the only entertainment I get out of this is seeing this moment and comparing it to his performances in years to come. People can claim he's not a good actor, fine, but seeing this clip shows how much effort he put into the craft, especially if you've seen one of his more recent movies like Maggie. Unbelievable transformation. It's the only interesting thing about Hercules in New York. Well, that and the way he runs in this scene. Arnold lands in the sea, and he's picked up by a boat, and there's a whole sequence about obeying the captain, and there's a bunch of misunderstandings, and it leads to a bunch of fights with the crew, because Hercules is basically a lazy sack of shit. He's bored and lazy. Great motivating factors for a main character. This is also our first glimpse of Arnold's physicality on film, and it is... Well, let me put it this way. There is no credited stunt coordinator or fight coordinator. So it just becomes a bunch of like hug fighting, and every fight is the same. It's just shoving and body mashing like two reluctant middle schoolers in their first fight, and no one wants to throw a punch. Yeah. After Arnold participates in the world's gentlest mosh pit, he meets Pretzi, a pretzel vendor played by Arnold Stang, a comic actor who voiced a ton of cartoon characters, including the Honey Nut Cheerios bee in the 80s.
Oh, Mr. Scrooge, Honey Nut Cheerios, it's Christmas.
Wow, so they got a real star here. Here, he hams it up as the nebbiishest nebbish that ever nebbished, a cross between Turtle Man and Mitch McConnell with the cadence of a comedian who has nothing funny to say. He hams it up every second he's on camera, and I'm assuming that's to counterbalance Arnold's charisma vacuum of a performance. And once these guys hook up, it's about 75 minutes of casually moseying from one bizarre strongman set piece to the next. There's no real narrative thrust because, again, Hercules is a bored, lazy asshole. He just sees a forklift and he stops it because he thinks it's a chariot. End a bit. They go to Central Park. Arnold reveals he has no money to pay the cabbie, so he hug fights the cabbie in a scene that isn't much better than the bad action movies me and my friends used to make in high school. Also, side note on this cabbie, it's entirely possible this guy was Marlon Brando's inspiration for Don Corleone.
Well, now, ain't that something? A mistake.
And I refused to be a fool.
Well, what do you know?
After that, they mosey on over to a baseball field where, for some reason, a college track and field team is practicing. And Hercules casually schools them in all sorts of javelin and long jump and discus. And here we meet a father, and his daughter, Helen, is dating one of the guys on the team. And then she is like alternately repulsed by and attracted to Hercules for the remainder of the movie. I get the repulsed part. He immediately creeps on her like within the first 5 seconds of meeting her. Then he does more huggy fighting, and somehow he ends up on a date with Helen on a horse ride through Central Park.
That man must be crazy.
Original?
Primitive. Well, do you know he had the effrontery to ask if I would have dinner with him tonight?
Well, of course you told him.
I would.
Naturally.
Okay. It's super romantic, especially the part where he accidentally hits her in the face. And then during the Central Park ride, a bear escapes. There's no reason, just a random occurrence. But it gives us the most famous sequence in this movie, Arnold wrestling a bear. A man in a bear costume. The poor guy in the suit just gets manhandled. And then that random event finally leads to some story progression when Hercules gets his name in the papers and is approached to wrestle. And look, at this point, It is very hard to keep watching. They keep cutting back to Zeus on Central Park Olympus, trying to figure out what to do with Arnold, but it's hard to understand anything. Literally, the audio is like rough cut quality. There was no ADR except for when they dubbed Arnold's voice. It's like watching a movie from 2,000 feet away and underwater. I think also Olympus is near a Central Park playground because the children playing nearby are louder than the conversation.
Do my bidding. Or when I have Zeus here in private.
And I particularly like this scene where they just use the fog machine as ambient sound.
Wants you to have the opportunity to make the most of this.
Oh, and if you like mandolin, well, this is the movie for you because this is all you're going to hear for 90 straight minutes. Doesn't change, just this. So then we get Hercules and Helen hanging out in New York City. They get to go on a little bit of a tour. It's a montage. They visit the Atlas statue. He takes his shirt off in the middle of the sidewalk. Okay. They grab some lunch. He flubs his line here.
This fine food for only a few small coins.
But they keep it in because who gives a fuck? Then they're back in Central Park again because when you've got a permit, you make the most of it. There's also a subplot here where a bunch of different people try to get Hercules to come back to Olympus, and he's like, nah, I'm good. And then they leave, and that's pretty much it. Zeus sends Nemesis to send Hercules to hell, but instead Juno convinces her to take away Hercules' powers, but he gets into this televised weightlifting contest. I don't know. He loses, and then the mob comes after him, so then he flees. But then he decides not to flee, because he's Hercules, and he finds a novelty chariot parked on the side of the road, and he jumps on, and what do you know? They head back to Central Park. Great details in this sequence include the gangsters driving a station wagon, and Arnold's cute little run returns. And this is the one time we get an actual gag that's structured like a real joke. When Arnold takes the novelty chariot, the guy who owns the chariot was getting a hot dog, and just as the vendor is putting the sauerkraut on, the guy runs to chase after Arnold. So the vendor chases after the novelty guy chasing after Arnold all the way to Central Park, and then finally when this sequence comes to an end, the vendor catches up with the guy, puts the sauerkraut on the hot dog. They did it! They set up and paid off one joke in the entire movie. And now we come to the finale. Has Arnold fighting the mobsters. Atlas and Samson show up to help. Samson isn't a Greek god, but this movie is as lazy as Hercules. More hug fighting. Then we're whisked away to the Empire State Building, where Arnold says his goodbyes to Pretzi. Kind of. He doesn't really. But in Arnold's book, he says that he shot this heartfelt goodbye with Pretzi, and the director told him he thinks he was really starting to get better. That was an emotional scene. And Arnold says he felt it too. But when I watch this scene, I have no idea what the hell he's talking about. They barely even interact. The only heartfelt moment between the two of them occurs without Arnold or his voice being present. Because after going back to Olympus, Hercules communicates with Pretzi through the radio using a different voice.
In the memory it leaves us, separation may have a quiet happiness all its own.
They didn't even bother having Arnold record that audio. They knew they were going to dub over it. Then we get a nice montage of all the inane things Hercules did, just to remind us of all the time we wasted. Thank you, movie. Thank you for rubbing it in my face. Then we wrap things up with Zeus hearing Hercules' tale, and he decides to head to Earth himself. I'm sure Hercules recounting the story of defeating a track and field team on a baseball field was what sealed the deal for him. Zeus is like, I gotta go to that place. Are you kidding me? They have a discus? Anyway, that's Hercules in New York. It was not a bad concept, putting Hercules in modern New York City, and the movie was very funny. Sorry, I should have said that's Arnold's take from his autobiography. I disagree! Bad movie all around! You know, you watch this and it's impossible to imagine Arnold giving a performance, even like in Kindergarten Cop. Like, it is very difficult to see the talent when you watch this. He could have just disappeared into the ether after this. It's a true transformation, and it really makes me appreciate his acting skills even more. It's the difference between Dirk Diggler's acting in his adult movies in Boogie Nights and Mark Wahlberg's acting in Boogie Nights. Sorry, I just watched Boogie Nights again. There's entertainment in Arnold's ineptitude, and it's interesting to see him completely raw and lost like a high school jock who wandered into the school play. But you don't have to watch the entire movie to get that. If you want to, it's on Amazon Prime, IMDb, but don't. Just don't. That's what I'm here for. What am I doing with my life? I've seen that movie more than once. Anyway, I love Arnold. What I'm going to do at the end of these is give a couple Arnold stats. So let's take a look at our stats for Hercules in New York. Arnold acting chops, 0. Kill count, 0. I think that bear lived. Catchphrase, I'm Hercules. And the every Arnold movie ever ranking, number 1, Hercules in New York. It's his best movie so far. Okay, we got through that one. Definitely the most painful Arnold performance, but we have to stay hungry because our next movie sees him going from an untrained, unintelligible, English-challenged bodybuilder to a slightly trained, slightly more intelligible, English-challenged bodybuilder who's also Golden Globe nominated in Stay Hungry.